The University of Minnesota Board of Regents meeting on Friday, February 10th, 2012 will please come to order. And welcome to all of you. When I heard that one of the people in the audience rode his bike here this morning, and the cold part, he said, was walking from his bike to his office, I thought, well, this is hardy Minnesota weather. Regent Larson is joining us by phone. Regent Larson, are you with us?
Good morning.
Good morning. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of our new Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost. President Kaler, please make a couple remarks.
Provost Hanson, would you please join us? Chair Cohen and Regents, it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you and to offer a warm welcome to our new Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost, Karen Hanson. Provost Hanson began working at the University of Minnesota on February 1st, and we are extremely lucky to have been able to lure her away from her post as Provost at Indiana University. Karen had been at Indiana as a professor, department chair, and senior administrator for 35 years. But she has deep Minnesota and university roots. Her father, Lester, was a university alumnus and went on to become chairman of our animal science department between 1956 and 1966. And Regent Johnson, you will be pleased to know that Lester was born in Wilmer, Minnesota, which, as we know, is 102 miles west of here. Her mother, Gladys, was a 1937 graduate of the U. Karen received her bachelor's degree in philosophy and math from the university, and her husband, Dennis Sinchuk, also received his PhD in philosophy from the university. Karen is maroon and gold through and through, and we are so fortunate, and I am extremely happy to have her as our Chief Academic Officer. Please welcome Provost Karen Hanson.
Thank you very much, and I should add that my older siblings have their degrees from here. All my aunts and uncles on both my parents' side, and my father had a very large family of 11, so that's a lot of people. They all met their spouses here. Freud says for a meaningful life you need work and love, and we found it both at the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota has been both a kind of foundational rock and a springboard for all of us. We've all received a lot of social and personal benefits from the intellectual capital that's concentrated here, and I am delighted to be able to come back. We were all encouraged, I think, by our educations here to try our best to make a social contribution, and I'm hoping that I can do that here now in this context. I'm delighted to be working under the leadership of President Kaler and his absolutely terrific administrative team and working for the faculty, the students, and the citizens of Minnesota. So thank you very much.
We'll try to get it after the meeting if we can.
We are indeed glad to have Provost Hanson with us. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. And now we will have the report from the President, Eric Kaler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate this opportunity to comment on recent events in the news and to unveil for you findings about statewide attitudes towards the University of Minnesota. First, the news. Last week, Joel Maturi and I announced his retirement as Gophers Athletic Director, effective on June 30th. an event chronicled with enthusiasm by the media. Personal integrity, a remarkable record of NCAA and Big Ten compliance, increased academic excellence by our student athletes, a deep commitment to gender equity, business and operational acumen, and overall athletic success have been among Joel's hallmarks. As you know, we also announced that Joel will remain on our staff for 1 year, teaching, fundraising, and assisting with the transition. I absolutely believe this is the right decision for the institution. Joel, I know, will make significant contributions in this year. He'll be compensated at a market rate commensurate with his experience, but I do understand for many, many people, his salary is a big number for their public university. I welcome the scrutiny of our decisions and the stewardship people feel for this great institution. But please realize that his principal duty will be fundraising. Joel has raised $160 million in a decade as athletic director. Raising funds for scholarships for student athletes has been a priority during his tenure. During fiscal year 2011 alone, Joel helped raise almost $9 million in scholarship support for about 500 student athletes. The fundraising success of several projects currently underway relies on Joel's continued involvement and his relationships, and he will return great value to the university. The search process for his successor will begin very soon. Let me now turn to our activity at the Capitol. I have made my first 2 appearances before the legislature in support of our biennial capital budget request. Last week, I presented to the Senate Higher Education Committee, and I was accompanied by UMD Chancellor Black, who spoke specifically about our request for the American Indian Learning Resource Center on the Duluth campus. I visited Duluth last week, and there is strong support among Duluth's business community for the Resource Center. Just yesterday, I appeared before the House Higher Education Policy and Finance Committee. We have 4 more legislative hearings scheduled for February 15th, 16th, and 22nd, and I would be honored to have any or all of you accompany me to any of those sessions. In presenting our capital request, I am particularly emphasizing the need for fully funding our HEAPR request. My wife, Karen, who is quite the poet, came up with a mantra: HEAPR is cheaper. And that is, preserving and updating our system-wide infrastructure now will result in cost savings for the university and the state in the long run, particularly when it comes to the area of energy efficiency. To support our legislative efforts, we've also redoubled our efforts to activate our alumni and friends. Earlier this month, we had a record attendance at our annual legislative briefing. About 500 citizen advocates from across the state came here to McNamara to learn how to tell their stories about the power and impact of the U. We even had a giant Twitter festival that caused quite a cyber stir. I know many of our regents attended what was, by all accounts, a very successful and energizing event. During my remarks at our legislative briefing, and in just about every forum I attend, the topic of tuition and student debt comes up, as it should. As we have discussed here many times, there's a direct correlation between the reduction in state support and the rise in tuition. At his State of the Union address, President Obama kicked off a firestorm by saying that institutions that do not rein in tuition costs will lose federal funding. But if you listen carefully to what he said about college being affordable, he first said states need to do their part by making higher education a higher priority in their budgets. The facts are clear. As state support falls, tuition and the burden on families grows. This is a national problem and a problem here in Minnesota. The university's tuition and our state funding are inextricably linked. And as we showed last year, when the state restored $25 million in funding to us, we used some of those additional funds to reduce tuition increases. In addition, as you know, we are embarked on efforts within our university to examine costs and improve our efficiency. We will do our part to keep tuition low by running this place as effectively and efficiently as possible, and we're working on that every day. Some other updates. In a follow-up to our meetings in December, we are finalizing membership in a Greek strategic task force to examine critical issues in our Greek community. Vice Provost for Student Affairs Jerry Reinhardt and university alum Fred Friswold, a longtime friend of our university, will chair the task force. Also, I have begun the process of an external review of our Academic Health Center. An external committee will be chaired by Dr. Ken Kashansky, a member of the Institute of Medicine, Dean of the School of Medicine, and Senior Vice President for Health Sciences at Stony Brook University, and someone with great respect in his field nationally, and a person whom I trust. The primary question for the External Review Committee to consider is whether the AHC is structured to ensure excellence in all of our health science schools. One of my strategic goals for this university is to strengthen the health sciences and improve the national reputation of the medical school. It is critical to both the future of the university and the future of the state of Minnesota that we improve our leadership position in the health sciences in order to meet workforce needs, discover new cures and treatments, continue to provide high-quality clinical care, and support the biomedical industry that is essential to Minnesota. Meanwhile, we are in the final stages of our search for a new dean for our Carlson School of Management. 3 candidates have conducted public forums, and a 4th is expected next week. A decision on our new Carlson School leader will be made shortly after all the candidate interviews are complete. Our search for a new dean for the School of Dentistry is moving forward. And we announced this week the formation of a committee to begin a national search to replace our retiring Crookston Chancellor, Chuck Casey. After 7 exceptional years as Chancellor and more than 3 decades of marvelous service to this university, including 2 terms on this board, Chuck is retiring June 30th. Now, finally, let me turn to some new data we recently received from this year's statewide public perception and attitude research. This is an important exercise we engage in annually to better assess what Minnesotans think about us and how we can improve our performance in the eyes and minds of our citizens. In it, we measure attitudes and opinions regarding the U among the general public and opinion leaders. We surveyed 1,003 citizens. I'm happy to report overall public perceptions of the university are positive and stable, with educational excellence, a variety of academic programs, and strong medical and research programs the key reason for the positive attitudes. 63% of our citizens think the U is a major contributor to the state's economy, an increase of 7 percentage points over 2010. But even more opinion leaders, 69%, think the U is a major driver of Minnesota's economy. As we have long known, the strongest connections people have to the university are through healthcare delivery and athletics. Perceptions in the metro area and in greater Minnesota were similar, although metro area residents feel more connected to the U than do respondents in greater Minnesota, perhaps not surprisingly. The research does show we need to do a better job at proving and promoting the value of our tuition and costs. We need to better tell our story of excellence and its value to the families of the state. Most respondents believe a university education should be equally funded by state taxes and student tuition. So we need to clearly articulate again the connection between tuition costs and state policy, which I continue to do. We also need to more clearly articulate and deliver on our belief that we are a good or excellent value. We must now go about the business of proving to our citizens, opinion leaders, and elected officials that we are, in fact, a great value and provide an excellent education. Many thanks to our University Relations Department for its hard and thoughtful work on this research. With that, Madam Chair, I complete my report.
Thank you, President Kaler, with some very important messages and information. Next item is my report. The board continues to place a high priority on strengthening the university's relationships with the business community and state government. To that end, Regents Beeson, Ramirez, and Simmons participated in the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce session Priorities Dinner in January. I attended a legislative reception hosted by the President at Eastcliff last month, and several regents will be attending a similar reception in coming weeks. Regent Simmons and I were on hand for President Kaler's testimony to the Senate Higher Education Finance Committee earlier this month, and I think there were either 1 or 2 regents yesterday at the Capitol with President Kaler when he was presenting. Several regents participated in the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's annual legislative briefing on February 1st. Regents McMillan, Beeson, and I. Was there any other regent there? I don't think so. And in the coming months, regents will continue to be active ambassadors in support of the university and its mission. The next regular meeting of the Board of Regents will take place on March 8th and 9th, 2012, on the Twin Cities campus. Although most board committees will not be meeting on that Thursday, we will have lunch with students in a dormitory, a work session, and tours that should be very informative. That concludes my report. There are no reports to receive and file this month. The consent agenda report is an action item, and I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Thank you. And it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion about the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The next item is a very important item, our 2012 six-year capital plan, and a review for everybody's information. So Senior Vice President Jones, Vice President O'Brien, and Vice President Fitzenreiter, please come to the table. I welcome you for your presentation. And President Kaler will give some introductory remarks.
Chair Cohen and Regents, I'm excited to introduce our presentation for the 2012 six-year capital plan. It is, of course, the first plan developed in my presidency and reflects my long-term vision for this great university system-wide. When it comes to bricks and mortar, the plan is all about facilities, usable spaces, and sustainability. But it is driven by the key tent poles of our fundamental academic mission: student success, scholarly faculty impacts, maintaining a statewide footprint for outreach and engagement, and serving as excellent stewards of our hundreds of buildings. We must do this all while responsibly managing our finances. Madam Chair and Regent, this presentation is so important that I need three of my colleagues to present, and I welcome your attention to them.
Madam Chair.
Vice President O'Brien.
Madam Chair, Mr. President and board members, Mr. Fitzenreiter is on his way, and he's kind of at the end of the presentation, so I think we can get started.
Sounds as though it will work just fine.
Yeah. You might wonder why we have Senior Vice President Jones, Vice President Fitzenreiter, and myself making this presentation. And that is because the three of us constitute the Capital Oversight Group. And we are the folks that work with a very able staff who have worked literally months to conduct the analysis across the university and to bring forward options to the academic vice presidents and the president to develop this plan that we're presenting to you today. The 2012 six-year plan includes the current state capital requests for 2013, future state capital requests, and projects proposed to be financed with university resources during the period of 2013 to 2018. The six-year plan is a tool to support the Board of Regents as you ensure that capital investments advance the university's mission and academic priorities. The six-year plan development begins with a review of these critical core processes and the analytical data presented in this diagram. This overview of the capital planning process really demonstrates where we are. The process starts with an academic program need or facility need. Secondly, a preliminary review and analysis of factors create rankings among priority projects. And today we're moving into the six-year capital plan document that summarizes the analysis and ranking and is a recommendation by the President to the Board of Regents. Finally, after a project or programs are in the 6-year capital plan, they would advance to implementation, but they must have approved pre-design, a funding plan in place, and of course, Regents action. Defining the priorities in the plan begins with or at the academic compact level, as the highest priorities surface within colleges and are advanced as part of each unit's compact submission. These priorities are considered for their strategic significance, first by deans and then to chancellors and vice presidents. Factors such as project sequencing and location have influenced the selection and timing of these investments.
There are 5 core principles that frame the work and frame the capital planning process that you see on the slide before you. These capital planning principles are also spelled out in greater detail on pages 39, 40, and 41 of the Board of Regents meeting docket. Time will not permit us to go into detail about each of these planning principles, but want to highlight one of the principles and how we go about making sure that principle is reflected in the projects that we bring forward. For example, ensuring student success, the plan reflects this principle in the projects that are designed to create facilities that are directly related to recruiting, retaining, educating, and supporting and graduating students. Also, the projects reflect the desire to improve teaching and learning outcomes and to enhance the student experience and student satisfaction. And there are measures to evaluate projects that are under this goal, including direct links between projects and the measure of student success, including 2nd and 3rd year retention rates, 4th year graduation rates, and overall student satisfactions as measured through the National Survey for Student Engagement that we refer to as the NSSE survey. Again, in the document material, each of these principles are described in great detail, as well as the objectives and the measures that are used with each of those principles. The foundational piece of this university for a very long-standing time is the use of academic objectives and a set of academic criteria to drive our academic decisions. And we want to assure you that we use that same set of academic objectives and the academic review criteria to also decide and judge projects that come before you as a part of the 6-year capital planning process. In our process of holding dialogues and sessions with each of the academic units as a part of the 6-year capital planning process, there were a number of key findings that came about or that evolved that we thought were important to share with you. These key points capture the key findings of the 6-year process with the deans and the chancellors and the vice presidents and fall into some of the following areas. For example, there was a clear and pressing need for laboratory space to be remodeled or redesigned across almost all the disciplines that we had conversations with. This desire ran the gamut all the way from wet laboratory redesign and upgrade to technology enhancement to building of computational laboratories as well as performance laboratories. There was also a recurring and resounding need to expand our interactive classroom space to facilitate different kind of learning and engagement and also facilitate the more flexible use of the space that we have. It was very, very clear that across all of these collegiate units that in the future there will be a heavy use of technology to support shared work efforts of our students and to support the multiple learning styles of our students. There was clearly a need to support increased collaborations across academic units, and I haven't been around the university for quite a while. I don't think I've seen this level of engagement and interest in units across different academic units wanting to come together to share resources and to reduce cost. An example of this is on the Twin Cities campus is the College of Biological Sciences is hiring a cohesive faculty teams from multiple disciplines to strengthen interdisciplinary research and teaching. Another example is the colleges that have split geographies or colleges that are split between campuses. For example, the College of Design and the College of Education and Human Development on Twin Cities campus, which both have programs that are scattered between the East Bank and the St. Paul campus. So very interested in consolidating that space in order to increase the possibility for collaboration and to share laboratory and learning resources. The other finding that surfaced was a growing interest in controlling costs through more efficient use of space, which also was advanced by almost each and every one of the units that we had a dialogue with. The 6-year capital plan also falls logically into 4 focus areas and major themes that are also consistent with the capital planning principles that we shared with you earlier. A full list of these projects through the 3 biennia is included in today's docket packet on pages 45 through 48. You will also note that most projects fulfill one or more of the capital planning principles as well. Today's presentation will provide you with a representative overview of the projects that demonstrate each of these 4 areas of focus. First, starting with research excellence, Tate Laboratory is the cornerstone of Northrop Mall with approximately 200,000 square feet of older space. The renovation that is anticipated will and can only occur after physics and the nanotech building that is currently under construction is finished, and it will allow a creation of a new home for the School of Earth Sciences and the opportunity to update science classrooms and to also provide non-laboratory spaces for the more theoretical portions of the school's work, both in physics and in astronomy. The St. Paul Campus Research Laboratory, I think, is a very good example of one of those academic planning priorities about enhancing or increasing academic synergy. The goal here is a collaboration between CFANS, CVS, and the College of Veterinary Medicine to create a laboratory for microbiology and some office spaces that will really help create academic synergies around this very important area of microbiology, as well as providing the opportunity for us to decommission obsolete space such as the space in Hobson Hall, as well as an opportunity to reconstruct existing space in biosciences, ag engineering, fisheries, the fishery labs, and a culprit lab as well. There's an opportunity also to invest in functionally obsolete space like Eddy Hall. The intention here is to create a new combined center for the departments of psychology in the College of Liberal Arts and the Institute of Child Development in the College of Education and Human Development. The Department of Psychology and the Institute of Child Development are among the highest ranked research programs at the university. Psychology is the largest undergraduate major and is also one of the largest generators of external funding within the College of CLA. Locating these programs in shared spaces will result in the opportunity to create a behavioral sciences district on the knoll of the East Bank campus. Now moving to the second focus area, the student success. The Morris campus has identified one of their top priority needs is the conversion of the Briggs Library to the Digital Information Center and Learning Common. This will provide an opportunity for renewal of business building systems, the correction of a number of code deficiencies. It will also renew this asset that has provided a very valuable service for the recruitment and retention of students and the academic success of students on the Morris campus. The Crookston campus has surfaced the needs for the development of a recreation and wellness center to serve its current population of students, and I might also add the growing population of students on that campus. Beside advancing student success, it is a strategy that if we invest in, we'll be able to maintain the competitive edge of the Crookston campus among the other undergraduate institutions in the region. The Duluth campus has seen very significant and sustained growth in its enrollment as well over the last 10 years, and classroom space is at a premium. These classrooms will provide spaces designed to optimize the flexibility of the space that they already have, but at the same time provide spaces that will provide multiple uses for new innovative learning technologies across the campus, and will also allow them to teach fewer sections in many of the courses that now require multiple sections, allowing more efficient use of their faculty time as well as meeting the enrollment demands of the students. On the Twin Cities campus, investments in the massive library collection will be required as a multi-tier approach in managing the collection. Preserving this important asset in various rare books and collections and undertaking renovation of the Wilson Library to make it more focused on student and faculty experiences are clearly needed, and in contrast to focusing on storing just various collections. At the University of Minnesota Rochester, there's a project that appears on the other projects on the consideration list that I'd also like to take a brief moment to highlight. This is the academic learning labs on UMR, which will support the growth of undergraduate studies in health sciences. This would consolidate from multiple locations to a single location, the learning lab, which is also timed with the targeted date of 2017, when this campus is supposed to reach its optimum enrollment of students in the undergraduate health science program. And this would also then facilitate the second phase of the project, which is be projected for 2019 and 2020, and of course will greatly depend upon the ability to meet the needs of a centralized learning laboratory in 2017. The asset renewal is the other focus area of projects that appear in the 6-year plan. The majority of these projects that appear actually in the 6-year plan or asset renewal projects. There's very little new construction included in these programs. The renewal of the campus will allow for better efficiency in building systems and allow the buildings to be maintained much of the traditional fabric and identity while improving utilization and supporting the academic use of space and lowering operational costs. Pillsbury is one of the oldest buildings, built in 1889. Restoration of the building as a new home for English is the target for this building. And it will become part of a project to create a humanities district on the East Bank campus. As we all know, and we heard yesterday, English is currently housed in Eddy Hall, which is the home of the Institute for Mathematics and its application, and a number of student services for the College of Science and Engineering enrollees. So this will provide an opportunity to create a home for the very highly ranked and growing English department. The core health sciences building, like the Phillips Wangensteen building, which was built as a major investment in the health sciences back in the 1970s. Much of the building is currently used for clinical space and is now in desperate need of revitalization and repurposing for today's highest and best use. This building warrants investments as it is well located in kind of the heart of the health sciences district. This would also allow the university to maximize a portion of its current physical assets. Repurposing of the PWB building will provide renewed space for several health sciences colleges such as pharmacy, nursing, public health, and support the university's interest in making a major facilities investments in dry labs and office space and research space, which is also, this particular building constitutes a very large part of our research profile. HEAPR investments have a multiplier effect on the conditions of our campus facility. They reduce the risk of emergency repairs and eliminate the needs for unpredictable investments in worn-out systems and building elements. By having an adequate HEAPR fund, we can address code requirements as well as program needs to upgrade laboratory, research facilities, and classroom. Building operational costs are forecasted to be reduced once the renovation occurs and major systems are overhauled. These forecasts are based on the recent data compiled for many of the types of spaces that we have on the Twin Cities campus, showing that there are no significant difference among most categories of space, such as laboratory, office, and classroom, for all of the categories of operating cost. The decommissioning of space is also an important part of our space utilization strategy and that we put forth. It may allow reuse of buildings based on new investments, or it can facilitate temporary closure and suspension of daily operation of space, and in some cases demolition follows decommissioning, but not in every case. Eddy Hall is an example of a building that is currently decommissioned but has been designated for future reuse. It is currently the oldest building on the Twin Cities campus. Future reuse of the building for the transfer office for our international students and for student admission will allow greater visibility of this important function at the university, and it's also strategically located given its proximity to Jones Hall. The renovation of Eddy Hall allows for a decommissioning of space in Williamson and in Frazier. The use of alternative workforce strategy is something that the university is also considering under Vice President O'Brien's leadership, and Eddy Hall and Dunn Howe will potentially be reconfigured for space by using this alternative workplace strategy. This will result in a more efficient use of space, reducing the overall demand and allowing decommission of other units such as Williamson and Frazier. Other projects, again, that are under consideration, there's a list that lists these projects on page 53 of your document material. These are additional projects that will be considered potentially as we go about the annual review of the 6-year plan. This list indicates potential projects in the next year consideration pending resolution of some of the essential components, while allowing more flexibility and allowing us to be more responsive to the changing trends as well as emerging academic priorities. This list indicates the potential next year, as I said before, capital projects pending resolution of some of these essential elements. Mr. Fitzenreich.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good morning. I apologize for being a few minutes late there. I've noticed the pace pick up everywhere since the President talked about that in his inauguration. The slide before you here is a couple of slides that we shared with the Finance and Operations Committee yesterday. The first slide here, the grand total investment and vision in this 6-year plan is approximately $1.3 billion. The 6-year plan financial framework is always predicated on very important state support, and 75% of this plan is envisioned to be paid for by the state of Minnesota. The university, through its 1/3 matching requirement, will be responsible for roughly $240 million of the plan. And then the 6-year plan also includes projects that the university will self-finance, totaling approximately $94 million. If you look at go to the next slide, this focuses just on the part of the $1.3 billion that would be part of our asks to the state of Minnesota. And as you know, in the even-numbered years are the big bonding bills at the Capitol. And the plan before you, as you can see, in 2012, 14, 16, and 18, the HEAPR share of our request, the 2/3 share that the state would fund, and the 1/3 match of the university. And you can see there in the light blue, and it's showing that way on the screen, the light blue and the more grayish blue, the HEAPR and the 2/3 state share are roughly equal in this request. We do include in the 6-year capital plan, because the state also does, on occasion, it seems sometimes they do a bonding bill every year, but they do a second bonding bill of a smaller size in the odd-numbered years, even though those are typically years when the operating budget, well, it's always when the biennial budget issue is at the legislature. And this plan envisions the traditional large request in the even-numbered years and a small HEAPR-only request in the odd-numbered years. The next slide shows you how the university-funded, self-funded projects, the 1/3 contribution from the university to match the state, as well as the state's overall contribution falls by fiscal year. And the last slide I want to share with you is one we also shared yesterday in the Finance and Operations Committee. We do a debt capacity forecast for the university, and we update that every year. And at a previous board meeting, we went through that debt capacity, and the green chart, the green bars on this particular chart, we look at them two ways. With foundation assets, the rating agencies allow you in your financial ratios to count those assets, but we bookend it on the other side without those assets. So in this 6-year plan, if the university issued our share of the projects, our share of the 1/3 and our self-financed projects in this plan, all is debt. And I will tell you that that doesn't always happen that way, that fundraising resources, department or college resources, or auxiliary unit resources come into play. But if we did issue it all as debt, you can see how that compares against the debt capacity framework that the institution has forecast for this 6-year capital plan. And we never have, in any 6-year plan that I've been involved with here, used up our debt capacity. We make sure that we have debt capacity in reserve. We don't push it all the way to the limit. There are things that may come up along the way that are important. And if they do come up, we look at it from the standpoint of the risk to the institution. We look at it from the source of payment as to whether we would push into that reserve capacity. This is something we discussed with the Debt Advisory Committee. It's something that Regent Allen and Regent Beeson, who's the current chair of the committee, advisory committee, take a careful look at. So with that, Madam Chair, that's really a highlight of the financial framework of the plan, and I'll turn it back to my colleagues.
Thank you, Fitz. What happens after the board passes a 6-year plan? Well, essentially, it's very important to remember that the projects that are included in the 6-year plan are really conceptual projects. These projects don't have a pre-design, and the financial estimates are based on an estimate of the amount of square foot needed for each project, and also our experience and how much it costs to build that kind of a building for that square foot. So these are very preliminary estimates and descriptions of the projects. After the board passes the 6-year plan, then we start to really go back and do the program definition with the academic unit, develop the pre-design, and from the pre-design, after there's an approved pre-design that includes a review by the appropriate academic officers and the president, Mr. Fitzenreiter, and myself, then we start with what is euphemistically called resource acquisition, which is going and getting the money to do this, right? And once we have the money, then a project will show up in your capital budget, your annual capital budget. Several times the board is touching these projects before we're actually all celebrating and putting a shovel in the ground to get these projects going. But this review of a 6-year plan is your first look at many of these projects. I should also remind the board that every year the 6-year plan gets renewed. So this is a 6-year plan starting under the guidance of President Kaler. It's his foundational 6-year plan proposal that is coming to you. Most projects that are in the 6-year plan get done. The university has used the vehicle of the 6-year plan since the late 80s. When we look at the last decade or dozen years, we'll find that almost everything got done. I think the Bell Museum is maybe the only project that has not gotten done. Frequently, it takes longer than 6 years to get done if you're in the 6-year plan. So, for example, Falwell Hall, which we opened last summer, was in the 6-year plan for 12 years. Hanson Hall, which we opened several years ago, maybe 4 years ago, was not in the 6-year plan for very long at all because Mr. Hanson gave $10 million to facilitate that building, and it leapfrogged over some of the other projects. So it's just important to put the 6-year plan in context. And then our next steps after today is that you would complete your review and act on the 6-year plan in March. This spring, we will be bringing back to you an annual capital improvement budget, and that would be at the May and June board meetings. We await the action on our current legislative request and are aggressively trying to ensure we get a sound allocation, and several of you have been assisting with that effort. And then once projects are approved, as I said, in the 6-year plan, we actually go to work defining those programs and doing the pre-design. I thought it was interesting just to present to the board an excerpt from our 2008 6-year capital plan presentation. And at that time, we were in the present that is identified on this chart, and I'm happy to say that we have gone into the future. And this is, I think, particularly important for the board to recognize that what we're presenting to you is very purposeful and following a strategic direction. It's not just a list of buildings. And finally, Madam Chair and board members, this is a draft resolution for your consideration and action in March, and we stand for your questions.
Thank you very much, Vice President Fitzenreiter, Vice President O'Brien, and Senior Vice President Jones. And I particularly thought it was very helpful for the board to have the review of the process, not only the presentation of the 6-year plan. And so, as you're all aware, today this is review only, and we will take action in March. And so now I'm sure there will be many questions and comments. So, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation yesterday in the Facilities Committee and this morning. Regent Frobenius asked an intriguing question yesterday. I've thought about it, and I'm still not sure we have the answer. You have given what is the formal process of selection of projects, and yet a begging question is, what is that selection project or projects like? And let me illustrate a brief history. In former days, 20 years ago, the process was something like this. Projects were talked about. Then Majority Leader Roger Moe would take care of Crookston, being in his district, and then the Iron Rangers would come in and load up the Brinks truck for Duluth, and there are a few crumbs for Morris. Rochester was not created, and then we looked around and had a few things for the St. Paul, Minneapolis campus. Then President Udall came to the legislature, and he had instructed staff here, we're not going to do that anymore. We have to sing off the same sheet of music, and we're going to have a priority list, and that was a much better process, and I do think it is. What I'm getting at is, what is the selection process? Do we play defense by saying, you know, the windows are falling out, the furnace doesn't work, or do we in fact select our buildings and renovation around academics that we in fact for these course offerings need this space, we need this utilization? I think that that lie is part of the answer, and I'm pleased to see that revolves around academics and the needs of course offerings. But the question still remains, why is a building or a project selected over against another? Because I can imagine at the holiday party, depends upon who gets invited, the pressures that are brought to bear upon the administration. People have said, I've waited for this project for 30 years, 40 years, and I'm going to retire next year, and it's never going to be accomplished. My point is, there are projects waiting to happen, to be funded, not enough resources. So as Regent Frobenius said, what is the selection process? Why Eddy Hall and not another project? It's the meeting before the meeting before the meeting I'm interested in.
I'm not sure which person would like to answer that question. Maybe
Yeah,
President Kaler, do you want to start?
I think I will answer that question for my colleagues. Chair Cohen, thank you, and Regent Johnson. You might be surprised at the relatively orderly way in which these priorities can sort themselves out. We have a set of metrics which are on the slide, capital planning principles, and we line up projects against those. And obviously there's a process of decision-making which is made by a group of senior administrators, and they begin to sort things out. They meet with me, and we line them up. It's easier than you might imagine. We clearly are going to organize ourselves around these principles as we look at what makes sense to do on the Twin Cities campus. Clearly, Pillsbury is an iconic building. It's a natural home for the English department. Tate Laboratory will be partially vacated as we build nanoscience, and so there's a series of relatively logical dominoes that fall from that observation, and that leads to part of what we're requesting. In the Academic Health Center, as we vacate space for an ambulatory care clinic, clearly we need to reinvest in that space and provide that neighborhood, and so on. So it's a relatively logical and moderately apolitical process that we go through. These priorities really make fundamental sense. There will be projects that are left at the side or on the second list, and people can be grumpy about that, but they, I think, cannot fault the process or say that the ultimate decisions we're recommending to you are wrong in any sense.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, thank you for that, and I just wanted to have that brief public discussion because I don't want people who sit here 5 and 10 and 20 years say, why did the president of the board construct or remodel that building? For instance, Williamson Hall. You know, I have no idea about the history of that, but that's the kind of thing we cannot do, is make those kind of mistakes. We have to fit the academic mission along with facilities and, you know, and move forward in times of scarce resources. I think we're doing that. I compliment you, but it's always a very difficult decision.
Thank you, President Kaler. Are there any additions from any of you at the table?
That's great.
We're set. All right, Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I want to comment about the same issue, but I have to tell you, I was so positively impressed with the process, with the principles, with the criteria that I see here that bring forward the list. I think it's incredibly robust. I trust it. Also, over the years sitting on the board, see it play out. The very fact that academic objectives are driving so much of this, and it's a system-wide look. That's clear to me. I mean, really just expressing my confidence in what comes forward because of what goes into it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Just a couple thoughts here. I appreciate Regent Johnson's question about process and President Kaler's response. It's not as clear to me how the coordinate campus piece gets into this, so that might warrant a little additional thought if you've got any thinking there. But I would consider this personally more a directional document that's always subject to change. I appreciated Vice President O'Brien's commentary that, you know, every year a new 6-year plan comes along. It just seems there's so many moving parts in the fiscal world today that to put, you know, anything more than a high-level roadmap type moniker on this is tough, and I wouldn't come back in a year and consider myself highly bound by what we've got here based on what happens this session, even with current funding priorities. So, and then one specific comment, I think, you know, the resolution's good. I find in that fifth whereas clause a bit of loftiness that is a little hard to attach to buildings and capital planning. That's not an objection, just a comment. I like lofty goals and lofty ideals, but fixing social issues and improving a state's health seems to fit into the university's overall mission, maybe not its capital budget, I don't know, but at any rate, comment only. But a little thought on how the coordinate campuses fit in and whether that bubbles up through Robert's group or otherwise.
President Kaler.
Chair Cohen, Regent McMillan, indeed, I assure our colleagues on the coordinate campuses that Senior Vice President Jones is a very tenacious defender of the needs on those campuses, and I think the exchange with the chancellors as they develop their priority list, both for new spaces and their positions on the HEAPR list are considered very fairly, and I don't think I would hear large complaints from our chancellors on how they are treated in the process.
Vice President O'Brien.
Madam Chair, really two points to Regent McMillan's comment and to follow up on the President and board members. First of all, I would say that every campus and every college have many more projects of merit that were brought to the process than you're seeing today. And I would very much congratulate the chancellors and the deans for the rigor they used in developing those projects, and then how difficult it is to really make those decisions and look at which projects have more urgency or more opportunity that help you really sort the priorities. But essentially, all of these are on the A list, and there's other projects that are very close to the A list that didn't, really make it even into the projects under consideration. Also, I would just say that the resolution is here as a draft, and of course, if the board would like to give us some direction on sharpening some of the whereases or points, we can do that over the next month, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I have a question, please.
Regent Larson, I had just added your name to the list and was going to call on you and just a couple of people, but go ahead right now. Regent Larson.
You woke me up. Question is as follows. Do we regularly have an updated long-term strategic plan and the request for capital are totally in sync with that? And the reason for my question is that it's been my experience that sometimes projects take on a life of their own and may not be totally in sync with the long-term strategic plan. And they should be absolutely in sync. Doesn't mean that the strategic plan doesn't change or can't change going forward, and therefore, obviously, some of the requests may also change, but they really need to be in sync. And are we deliberate about that on a regular basis?
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, Regent Larson, and I would welcome my colleagues' amplifications or corrections to what I am about to say. I would characterize the institution as having had a considerable and extended and vigorous strategic planning activity in previous years. And when I arrived, I found myself in congruence with the directions in which we're going, and so I've made the decision in my first year to not engage in a strategic planning activity, but rather to move forward in the way the institution was already pointing. We will, going forward, sharpen and refocus on certain areas, but it is very hard for me to believe that any sensible strategic plan would find itself at variance in any significant way with the capital planning principles that we have laid out here and that have guided the selection of these capital projects.
Thank you.
Vice President O'Brien.
Madam Chair, as a historian, I can't help but add some specific context to President Kaler's remarks, and that is to say the academic criteria that are included in this document were developed in 1980 by the then Vice President for Administration, Niels Hasselmo. through a very broad consultation with university governance. And that was from a very early strategic planning process in the university. So quality, centrality, efficiency, effectiveness, demand, all of those criteria for our academic programs were developed over 30 years ago. And as President Kaler suggests, there's been several cycles of strategic planning since that time using those same criteria.
Thank you very much. Vice President Jones.
Yes, Chair Cohen, members of the board, President Kaler, just like to add just very briefly that to remind the board that on an annual basis, the administration produces the accountability report, which actually is a document that kind of reminds us and provides a framework of the incremental advances that we're making toward that strategic plan. And about a year ago, the board adopted a metrics framework that will also create a set of a dashboard, if you will, so that the board can have a good opportunity to see where we're moving incrementally as it relates to the key measures associated with carrying out that strategic plan. And again, to reiterate what Vice President O'Brien said, the academic objectives and the academic criteria and the principles and the strategic planning process across all academic units, including the coordinate campuses, are seamlessly linked across the academic plan and also the capital planning process.
Okay, thank you all for those comments. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff, for your work that went into producing this document. Trying to take this to sort of a macro level, all organizations, whether they're private or nonprofit or public, really use less space going forward than they have in the past. That's through technology, it's through other forms of efficiency. And I remember, and I want to be reminded that we have a goal to reduce our footprint by 5%. And I think that may be a guiding principle. I don't think it's up to us. I don't feel the need to sort of mandate that we absolutely live within that. But goals like that drive behaviors. That'll drive our focus on HEAPR. It'll drive our use of these buildings. And so I think that sort of measurement belongs in this document. It might belong in the accountability report. It might belong in the annual update. But I think we have to measure out. And that isn't to say that I mean, we are a growing business, so I'm not saying that we have to reduce 5% if there's a large project that comes along. But if we don't measure ourselves for the plant that we have, then I think it's really hard to make progress on what really is one of our big cost drivers.
Madam Chair, Regent Beeson, Mr. President, and Regents, Regent Beeson, I'm very happy to report that one of our metrics on asset preservation is exactly the item that you are identifying in terms of using the space we have well. I also would invite the board to just look down the list in the 6-year plan and realize there are almost no new buildings in the list. I believe the expansion at the University of Minnesota Crookston Wellness Center is the one, what you might call a new building that's an expansion. All of the other projects, whether you're talking about Tate or Pillsbury or Wilson Library or Heller Hall up on the Duluth campus or Briggs Library at the Morris campus, all are actually the renovation or restoration of existing buildings. So I believe we're really being very true to that principle. The other thing I would say that many of these projects will lead to either the ability to, as Regent Johnson said, decommission or even demolish buildings, or also as public health, the School of Public Health moves into PWB, get out of some very long-standing leases and expenses for the university. So hidden in this plan are more details that get directly at the point Regent Beeson is making.
Thank you. Regent Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I originally asked for time to speak about one of my favorite subjects, HEAPR, but in the interest of time, I'll save that till we have this back before us. I think that's an important item, and it needs a little bit of interpretation. Instead, I want to add to the discussion we're just having. You know, I came here after retiring from about 20 years of sitting in the same seats that these folks sit in, not here, but elsewhere. And I was well aware of how important it was to have a good process and good criteria for looking at projects and ultimately selecting them. I think we have a good process here. But I also know from that experience that there are always ways around that, and unless the people who run that process are committed to the process, it doesn't work as well as it might seem like on paper. These folks, I have come to believe, are fully committed to the good process we have here. And so I compliment them on it for putting the process in place, for being committed to it, and for bringing us some good work. I think there are always ways we can improve it. Some of those things have been suggested in the committee meetings and around the table today. But it's good process, it's good people running it, and I think we ought to have good confidence in it. And I know we have a new president who's committed to it also.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Regent Allen. Regent Frobenius.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I want to comment on a specific aspect of Vice President Fitzenreuter's discussion on the chart on the theoretical impact on U of M debt capacity, and sort of give you the Finance and Operations Committee review of that process, because it's a very important point, and I think part of our role as the Finance Committee of this board. But the committee did spend quite a bit of time on this particular point, and I think became satisfied that the university's financing of the obligations necessary to complete the 6-year plan were well within the parameters that would allow us to continue our current debt rating based upon our forecast over the next several years. That includes several key metrics, including one that's sort of easier for most people to understand, that our debt service of this university would remain about 3% of or less of our expenditures. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that. And there is, in the slide that I mentioned, a description of a cushion. That's one of Regent Allen's favorite topics of maintaining that, because we will have things come along from time to time that could have impact on that. That being said, I want to mention at least one other project that several have asked me about on this board, and I'll give my perception of understanding. This 6-year plan does not include an ambulatory care clinic for the combined use of University of Minnesota physicians and Fairview system. That project, it's my understanding that project is on very, very active review. Its current form of financing right now would be outside the university's financing. This board will receive a work session on that topic at our coming meeting in March, I believe. And I think the more important details of that project will be identified and worked out and brought back to us at that point in time. At this point, it appears it would not necessarily need to be on this capital plan list, but adjustments could be made if needed.
Thank you, Regent Frobenius. And Regent Broad.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Regent Frobenius, I appreciate you saying that. That was a concern that I raised yesterday. And actually, as I look through this information, I now I'm looking at the Academic Health Center repurposing as kind of the placeholder for that additional conversation going forward, and so I'm very comfortable with that. A couple things before. I couldn't agree more with Regent Beeson. I look at this plan, this 6-year capital plan, as a statement of purpose and a statement of goals and statement of principles. And I think that 5% goal should be actually stated in this plan. I think it's a good goal. It's a goal that everybody around the table agrees on, and I'd love to see it stated, actively stated in this plan. Another thing that I'd love to see actively stated in this plan, which I'm very pleased Vice President Fitzenreuter indicated yesterday that President Kaler and you and others are working on, which is a specific set of criteria and specific set of parameters and benchmarks related to public-private collaborative projects. And I'd like to see us actively state in this plan that we evaluate those public-private partnership opportunities for the best interests of the university and managing our finances well. I think that there's a great place for that on page 41. Is a bullet point in terms of just very actively stating that we evaluate alternative financing and evaluate opportunities such as public-private collaborations. And so I'd love to see that stated as a goal and stated within this plan. And I am very pleased that that activity is going on right now. Just as a follow-up on that, it's, you know, public-private partnerships, people like me who think that they're a great idea also understand that they're not just a great idea and that you walk into them blindly. And that's why the criteria in proving that they actually provide value to the university is so important.
President Kaler, you have a response.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, Regent Broad. I completely agree with you, which is why we're having the internal discussions now, so that we do have very clear and publicly known metrics about that define the parameters around which we would enter into public-private partnerships. Doing this in an ad hoc way has been frustrating to a variety of people, including me. And we want to set those out in a very clear way, and we're eager to engage with private partners for the good of the university.
Well, thank you all. This clearly is a very item of great interest. There's very lively discussion. And again, I want to thank the team who brought this report to us. It's very thoughtful. You can tell from the comments that people have confidence in it, and there's some suggestions. So thank you all very, very much for your work on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, guys.
The next item is the recalibration of risk in the research enterprise, and President Kaler has some introductory remarks, and Vice President Mulcahy and Ms. Webb and Ms. Baltimore, please come to the table.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Regents, as you know, one of my goals as president is for this great university to become more nimble and less risk averse. I think this change will improve our operational excellence, allow us to make decisions quickly, and ideally produce cost savings. All of those changes, though, must, of course, exist within a strong culture of compliance. Vice President Mulcahy and his colleagues will now present to you a full report on the recalibration of risk initiative in the research enterprise. It's a critical initiative, as we are the state's only public research university, and we continue to be among the nation's leaders in research university. I thank you for being here today, and I look forward to your comments.
Chair Cohen, President Kaler, members of the board, before I get into the presentation, I would like to take the opportunity to present my colleagues. As usually happens here, I will be presenting the fluff and they will be presenting the substance. So I think it's important that we identify who they are. To my right, to your left, is Pamela Webb, who is the Associate Vice President for Research and Director of Sponsored Projects here at the university. And to my left and your right is Sarah Waldemer, who's the Director of our Research Integrity Oversight Programs in the Office of the Vice President for Research. These two individuals were tasked with really implementing the plans that we shared with the Board of Regents over the last year about recalibrating risk, using the research enterprise as the launch pad for this initiative. And I'm proud to be here to share with you those results along with my colleagues. I would start this presentation by giving a very quick background introduction, because some of the members of the board were not involved or were not here at the time some of this initial dialogue started. But as part of the Advancing Excellence initiative that President Brunick started a couple of years ago, a small group of us got together and began to work on the university's approach to risk and risk management, its tolerance for risk. And we are of the opinion that, in general, the university was quite conservative in how it approaches some of these issues. And as a result of that, we put a team together to explore ways in which the university might begin to think about this differently and hopefully implement some change that would actually allow it to be more nimble, to be more entrepreneurial, while still maintaining a responsible position on issues of importance. I would say that over the course of 18 months, I gave 30 presentations on this topic across campus to over 600 people. There were only 2 people who disagreed with the assessment that we shared. One thought that we did not capture the university's attitude correctly and said it was very conservative. The other disagreed in saying we weren't going far enough in characterizing it that way. So in general, there's overwhelming support for the idea of looking at risk anew as an opportunity for the university. So we spent 12 months working with the board, making presentations over a 12-month period to identify and think a framework for this work. And I'm happy to say that in June last year, the board approved our plans and our recommendations to begin an initiative to address risk in a very strategic approach. And it's that exercise that we're here to report for you today for two reasons. One, to keep the board apprised of these efforts as we pledged we would at the time. And two, to provide some feedback and input on opportunities for our colleagues to follow as this is a prototype. Because I'm happy to say that in the last 2 months, President Kaler has also charged his direct reports with initiating a similar set of exercises in their own areas of responsibility. So we believe we've got some experience here that will benefit our colleagues as they tackle those challenges as well. So I would just start with this first slide to give a framework. Across the top of this diagram is a bar which really kind of shows the continuum of how risk is addressed in any organization or even individually. And it ranges all the way from avoiding risk completely to being completely reckless in how you approach risk. What we're advocating for the university is that we need to have active systems and processes in place to find the right fulcrum point for the university. At the beginning of this initiative, everyone would have characterized the M, as I'm showing it on this slide, as being far to the left of where it is currently. We believe that there's an opportunity for the university to balance its optimal pursuit of mission with ethics and responsible accountability to find a more strategic approach to risk, which actually will help us be more entrepreneurial, et cetera, going forward. The important thing to remember is that the board and the leadership of any organization really needs to be responsible for helping gauge where that right fulcrum point is, which is why your engagement is so important in this exercise. As a first attempt to do this, after we got the board's permission to proceed, we thought about how we would go about doing this, and this is a proposal we made to the board at the time, in that the university has many, and I'm going to refer to these as compliance obligations because this focus is on research, but I think you could put a number of other types of obligations or expectations on the left side of this equation. Many things that are beyond the university's control we have to deal with, but we can't dictate what those pressures are, for example. But what we do have is a great deal of leverage and control over how we as an institution impose policies, procedures, or practice that either make it easier for the organization to deal with those pressures and expectations or makes it harder. And the impression from the university community at the time we did this exercise was that we actually put a lot of things in place that made the already challenging set of obligations and expectations even greater and had an impact of increasing burden, reducing morale, reducing productivity, and in some cases increasing costs. So we thought it would be a very good first exercise on what is undoubtedly will be a long road to cultural change, to a more strategic approach to risk, to take a look at these things that we do control, policies, procedures, and practices, to see if there are ways that we could relieve some of this burden and pressure. So I asked my group and charged my direct reports, 7 units in the Office of the Vice President for Research, to begin exactly this kind of process, to look at policy, practice, and procedures, to see if there are ways that we could enhance performance while maintaining responsibility and accountability, and to focus on 7 important potential outcomes of this exercise. More innovative approach to the research mission, reduction of unnecessary oversight, aligning oversight with the risk, greater openness to opportunity, enhanced competitiveness, better staff engagement and empowerment, increased efficiency, reduction of burden, and cost savings. And at this point, what I'd like to do is turn this program over to Pamela and Sarah as I ask them to actually manage this initiative so they have the first-hand experience. But we're able to now share with you the outcome of what is yet to be completed, but it's been about a 6 to 9 month process. We're well along the way, and I think you'll be happy to hear what they have to share with you. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Pamela.
Thank you. Good morning. We faced a somewhat major challenge with trying to figure out how to approach this because Tim did charge Sarah and me with the how. And we knew that it wasn't realistic for us to pull apart every process, every policy, every procedure that were within our units, because we'd simply get mired down in what I've been known to call admiring the problem, and not be able to actually get any meaningful results. So we took upon ourselves the challenge of trying to put an approach in place that would help all of the OVPR units actually get to a meaningful outcome. So what we decided we had to do is figure out a game plan that would let units figure out what are the right areas for them to work on to get some real results quickly, and how to do that in a way that had really minimum administrative burden on those units, because they were still doing everything they always needed to do in their regular work environment at the same time. We also needed to set up the long-term plan so that this didn't become a flash in the pan and only doing this once. Along the way, Tim also asked us, as we were designing, to please find a way to make this reproducible so that it could potentially be used for other units as well. So we're going to go ahead and show you a little bit about what it is that we came up with. If you look at the top of this design here, you'll see that it talks about identifying risks. So we thought that actually was the right place to start. We asked units to take a look at where they had risk, where they knew they were managing risks. And that could sometimes be risks that they were already managing, but perhaps processes had been put in place many years ago and were obsolete at this point. Or it could be risks that they knew in the back of their head perhaps had been emerging and were not quite managed the way we want them to be. We also asked them to look at where they were spending their time. The reason that we did that is we figured if you're spending a lot of your time on something, it's because you figured out that that is something important for your unit and something you're trying to accomplish by devoting that much of your resources to it. And so there might be a very large bang for the buck if you could change something out about how you were doing and have a lot of impact from that. We asked them to also look at analyzing their risks to kind of quantify the size. So what's the frequency of that risk? What's the likelihood that risk will actually come into play? And perhaps the most important is, what's the impact on the university if that risk actually transpires? We also wanted them to look at, is it an internal policy or procedure that is dictating a certain policy or procedure, or is it a regulatory situation that we have to, a law or requirement that we have to follow? Even if it's a regulatory requirement, sometimes there are different ways to achieve compliance with those other than perhaps what we have chosen today. So the units were all asked to turn in a list of their top 10, kind of a Letterman list. And then we took a look at those, mostly to see if units were taking it seriously, if there had been good thought. We wanted the units to share those across with each other, because it helps stimulate some thinking across units as well. The next part of the process was then exploring that change. If you were going to change something, what would you change? What parts of your process might not be adding much of any value, or could you achieve the same objective in a much more streamlined approach? Sometimes we found we could stratify. We could stratify, for example, by dollar level of a transaction, or by the type of sponsor, or perhaps by the presence or absence of some other risk factor as it was moving along. And that might be a way to approach it. We asked people to look at, how do other institutions do this? Because it's not like we have all of the great ideas here, just most of them. And then also, is there any kind of national direction for this risk? Is it becoming more risky, less risky over time? And what can we learn from that? So from there, we asked them to go ahead and plan the change. Okay, now that you've got all this background, you know what your risks are, you've thought through what you might do and what is possible, now what do you want to do? What risks do you want to pick to work on? And are there any risk mitigation actions that you might need to take in order to make this happen? An example of that would be one of my projects was looking at, can we decrease the frequency that faculty have to certify their effort on their sponsored projects here at the university? Well, in doing that, I found out that my policies related to that were tied to another unit's entirely separate policy. And before I could proceed with mine, I had to work with the other policy owner to deconnect, if you will, my policy with theirs so it wouldn't have an unanticipated adverse consequence. We also asked them, okay, what policies, procedures, system changes are you going to need to do? Because we need to plan and have the resources and put in the time and effort to be able to make those changes. And we asked people to identify what consultation they needed. Almost all of the major changes we do in our area, we want to consult with the faculty and we want to consult with the staff that are impacted by those changes. Because many of our initiatives were taking place in the summer, that had a consequence for us because some of the faculty consultative committees weren't meeting during the summer, so we necessarily had to put in timetables that allowed for that consultation to happen in fall. And then we got Vice President Mulcahy's approval for all of these plans that we had decided to do, and then we did them. Okay, maybe the most important part, then we did them. We built into what we were trying, again, to our process, that the directors of the units would use their regular meetings with Tim to report their progress. That helped keep everything fresh. It kept it moving along, and it helped it from getting accidentally put at the bottom of the pile because we were all very much engaged in making it happen. I will tell you we learned a few things along the way from doing this. We learned that the consultative process did take us longer than we had originally planned in our timelines, and our policy changes when we needed them also took us more time than we had originally envisioned. But we thought that was okay because it was so important to get that consultation and to make sure those processes happened well. It was worth it. We learned it was a little hard to do all of these projects simultaneously with our regular work, and in some cases we did have to shift timelines. We think if we had to do it over again, we would actually have units pick their top 3 or 4, for example, initiatives from their list of things they picked to do and ask them to concentrate on those first and then perhaps move on to another set of those when those were complete. We're now at the stage where we're finishing up the current set, and we're going to then debrief the process. We're also testing the impact. We want to know if what we did actually worked. If it made it easier for our offices, if it made the risk more reasonable, if our clients were more satisfied. So we're going through that debrief process, and we also intend here very shortly then to celebrate success and use it as an opportunity to have all our units share with each other what they did and to thank all of the people that made tremendous investments in what they were doing. So let me show you where we are at this point. You can see all the units in Vice President Mulcahy's area participated very actively in this. I'm pleased to say that we actually picked 66 projects for action, and at this point, 85% of those are in play or completed. And we hope many more of them in the next very, very few weeks here are also going to be completely finalized. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Waldemer, so she can show you actually what this really looked like in real life as we did it.
If I could just interject here for a second. The purpose for the next couple of slides is there was some concern expressed early along, some from members of the board, but some from my colleagues, that this has to be a thoughtful, careful process in order to be effective. And so I think the intent of some of these follow-on slides is to just pick 1 or 2 examples to show you the kind of deliberation, consideration, and factors that went into making that. And the reason for doing that is just to reassure you that there is, in fact, a very thoughtful process behind doing this. So, Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, and I'll turn it to you.
Anytime at all. So as you look at the next slide, the sample initiative, it's really busy. I know there's a lot of information. But what I'd like to draw your attention to are the 3 columns. Column number 1 spells out what, in this case, the IACUC saw as the anticipated benefits of making a change. What would we win? What opportunities could we take advantage of if we made this change? And then column 2 is really kind of a terribly important column since it deals with the perceived risks. And as Vice President Mulcahy has mentioned, prior to this, we really didn't accept anything that had risk attached to it. So spelling out the risks that went along with the recommended change and quantifying them in terms of whether they were low, there was a low likelihood of risk, a high likelihood of risk, was an important part of this. And then the 3rd column explains, it lays out the plan of action. What are we going to do? Who do we need to consult with? Who are the stakeholders? Who are our customers? So the next slide, deliverable number 3, is really the final report that we presented to Vice President Mulcahy. And on this, again, lots of information, but I'll try and point out what we consider to be sort of the most important parts. At the top is the brief list of major activities, and that comes from the previous slide. What was done, who was consulted, if there were governance bodies that needed to be consulted or provide approval, if there were regulatory issues that needed to be addressed, those kinds of things. That's what's on the top. And then under the results, and again, as was mentioned, that's how it will move forward. So it also lays out, in this particular instance, what the rules are that surround making this change. So if, in fact, we go ahead and reduce the inspections, the post-approval monitoring inspections in the IACUC labs, what determines what that reduction, why there is that reduction. And what we found was that for researchers who had excellent history of findings, their labs are in great shape, they're doing a really good job, this is an incentive for them. They have fewer inspections, they get to do more of their research. It really works well for them. And we found that this would impact 20 to 25% of researchers who work with the IACUC. So now we have researchers who want to get up in that top 75 to 80% level. So we think it's working well. This slide will just, it's a very high-level picture of some of the other initiatives that we put forth. And really what, again, I'd like to draw your attention to is that the benefit was laid out, the risks were assessed, and in these particular ones, and in many of them, we found that the risk of change was relatively low, and the frequency of occurrence that the change would impact was high. So these activities were frequent within the units, but making these small changes had very little impact with respect to our risk profile. So then we found that there were some other people ready to jump on the bandwagon with us. And one group is the certified approvers. And the certified approvers are a group of just over 200 staff here at the university who have been tested and certified and are responsible for approving the high-risk documents that pertain to financial transactions on sponsored projects. So these people live risk every day when they're looking at transactions. So what they did, they had done a pilot project almost a year ago, and a few of them took it upon themselves to go out and launch a university-wide initiative where they talked with collegiate departments and administrative units with their peer certified approvers and looked at 18 research-related policies. And what they did was put together a consensus. They brought it back and submitted a report to Vice President Mulcahy, and we'll be moving forward. But as Pamela said, many of these policies aren't ours. So it will take some collaboration, lots of conversations, and lots of input from the units that own those policies. But we're striving to make changes in that area as well. And then finally, there were a couple of other places, a couple other groups that took this to heart. For example, the Biosafety Committee is a regulatory committee, and they really self-initiated a review of their policies and their procedures in an attempt to streamline them for their researchers and certainly for their office. And They went out and they vetted the changes. They got broad consultation with the researchers. They got consultation with, for example, environmental health and safety, those units that are impacted by whatever changes they might make. And they, again, check the regulatory requirements. And the changes they've made have, as you can see, decreased the number of renewal deadlines. Overall, they've had several really positive effects for this regulatory committee and for the people that submit their materials to it. And then finally, one of the collegiate units had asked the Controller's Office if it was possible to streamline our process for selling things to outside researchers and vendors. And so the Controller's Office with the Office of the General Counsel worked together to put together a really simplified short form for selling to outside researchers and outside customers. And this increases, what's the word I'm looking for, organization, streamlines it for the colleges, for the vendors. It makes us more appealing to outside customers and to outside researchers. So with that, I will turn it back to Vice President Mulcahy for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela and Sarah. I would just conclude our remarks by saying the reason we included these last couple of slides is we initiated most of these changes we've shared with you as part of the work of the office, or the offices that report to me. But I wanted to show you these other efforts where other groups have really accepted and actually bought into this concept and on their own are beginning to ask this questions. We're very pleased that President Kaler has made it very clear that this is a presidential expectation and something that is very important to his agenda for the university, and we stand prepared to help our colleagues if they would like or if they need in how to go about doing this or how we've done it and whether it would work for them or not. We're excited that there's an opportunity here for the university to make a key change, I think, to reduce its liabilities as it faces an uncertain future. So we stand for questions, if you please, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for a really informational and interesting report. And now I'm sure there are questions and comments from some of the regents. Regent Allen.
Have you seen some movement of people up into that, I don't know whether you said 20 or 25% of the principal investigators who are in that top category and who have had some of these red tape removed from them? Are there some folks moving up or expected to move up pretty quickly now that that incentive is there?
Chair Cohen, Regent Allen, it's been too early. This particular change, if you note the timeline in the handout, was finally approved by the full Animal Care and Use Committee late in 2011, and it is just now being communicated, which is another very important part of this whole process. You can make all these changes. If people aren't aware of it, you're not going to get very far. So we've been communicating this change to researchers, and I have to tell you the response has been very positive. So I expect this will serve as an incentive. We already have very, very high compliance in these areas, and in fact, in a way, although this will be incentive for some, this will be a reward for many.
Thank you. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I come at a lot of these issues with a bit of a private sector lens, and I want to commend you for tackling enterprise risk management, and so a commendation there, but also a question for you. One of the hardest things in a private sector setting is to take risk management from what is intuitively or inherently a defensive exercise, defending against risk, and trying to flip your lens around and look at it offensively and look for opportunities. This presentation seems to focus in this effort on a really, really important thing, which is eliminating processes you don't need to stay well risk managed. But is there also a broader look at taking what looks like a risk at first and saying, is there an opportunity there for the university outside of process?
Chair Cohen, Regent McMillan, absolutely. And in fact, in all the presentations that we've made over the past 18 months to various committees of the board, the point that we made sure to emphasize is that this is going to require a culture change within the university. And any culture change in any organization is difficult. I would contend that in a university it's that much more complex. So we realize that it's going to take time to do that. But one of the interesting things is when we first started this initiative, if you had walked, in fact, you probably still get the same response. If you walk down the halls in any place in the university and ask 10 people what the first thing comes to mind when you mention the word risk, I would say 8 to 9 of those 10 would come up with some negative connotation. Very few of them would come up with the idea that opportunity also involves some risk. And so we're trying to change that culture. This is a first step to try to help units begin to ask the easy things that we can do. But we are, as an institution, with President Kaler's direction, we are, as a bunch of leaders, actually, that sounded really professional, didn't it? A bunch of leaders. As a group of leaders, we are really beginning to look at ways in which the institution can take opportunity. And I would point out one that the board is aware of already. The Minnesota Innovation Partnership that we talked to the board about at your last meeting. That was one of the initiatives that came out of the Office of Technology Commercialization and Sponsored Projects Administration. It really wasn't addressing reducing burden for us. It was really addressing hassle for outside partners. But in doing so, it was addressing and opening the door to opportunity. So we are beginning to make those kind of plans as well. But it's going to take a multi-year, consistent effort in this direction for this to really have a full impact.
It's a great example. Thank you. And lest I sound like I'm saying the private sector has it right, this is equally hard to change culture there. So it isn't one of those where we get it. It's really, really tough stuff to switch that culture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Larson, I know you're interested in culture, and I just wondered if you had any questions here.
No, I'm very, very glad that we're appropriately addressed.
All right. Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. As someone who counsels adolescents on avoiding risk-taking behavior, what I'm about to say doesn't roll out of my mouth easily, but as we increase our appetite for risk, and I want to, as we increase our appetite for risk, I think this board needs to scrutinize our responsibility here. Do we have the expectations, the standards, the processes, the oversight in place to, in fact, help this succeed, since we have said we want it to?
Yes, President Kaler.
Chair Cohen, Regent Simmons, what you will see, and it's a year-long process before we will do this, but across the administrative areas, I think you will see a percolation, a wave of changes that will come up, and ultimately they will bump against board policy and procedure. And frankly, that's also, I think, how to do this professionally, Vice President Mulcahy.
Well, I set a low bar. So.
I think the institutional expectation would be that the board will look very, very hard at those policies. And if you push back, fine. But I would expect to see changes in operations of the board too.
Follow up, Regent Simmons.
Yes, just simply that I do want us to commit as a board to indeed address this, because I think we have an important role to play, more important now than ever in terms of oversight.
Chair Cohen, I wonder if I may respond to Regent Simmons as well.
Certainly, please.
I think, Regent Simmons, you're absolutely correct. And in fact, we believe that to be very true. In fact, we need not just the support of the board, but the guidance of the board as we set some of these thresholds. Some are thresholds and activities that are really within our purview to deal with, and they don't elevate to the level of the board, but we really need you in those critical areas to set this. If you look at the literature, and yesterday I know the audit committee got a report from the Deloitte consultants talking about risk management. All of the material we've shared to this date and their material reinforce this concept, is that the board or the leaders of the organization have to be intimately aware and involved, and I think that's an important role. The other thing I would say, by way just of reassurance for everyone about this, I know that some people feel uncomfortable with the university moving in this direction because they don't want to blunder into a mistake, even a well-intended error. And I would just say that this university, more than virtually any other I can think of, because of its history, has established and put in place some outstanding systems to monitor our activities, our behaviors, our compliance, and it's only with that comfort of that competence that we're going forward. And I think the board can be confident that the safeguards are in place, that we will not inadvertently blunder in a way that would embarrass the university or the people of the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. Regent Beeson, and I have Regent Beeson, Regent Broad, and Regent Allen on my list here.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and thank you, presenters. This is really an exciting presentation. When Regent McMillan talked about trying to play offense a little bit, and, the way I'd characterize recalibration of risk in my workplace, and I'm in the second most regulated business next to nuclear power plants, I think, is really, it's the fear of making small mistakes. And you know, that weighs on our staff a lot. And so you've provided a path here toward improvement on that. How we scale this up and how we institutionalize, that's a bad word, but how we make permanent, the processes you're talking about are forever processes. If all we do is sort of, this is the only time you review processes and procedures, this won't have the impact. But it's how do you build this into your work plan every year in some way so that there's continuous improvement. And this is really this is more powerful than the Mead Act's approach in terms of efficiency. This is the hard lifting that creates the savings and the productivity and the morale improvement you referenced. So thank you.
Chair Cohen, Regent Beeson, I would just add one thing. One of the messages that we learned, or lessons we learned, as Pamela indicated, was we had to go back to the work plans that were in place before we initiated this exercise and actually take some tasks off the pre-approved work plan to make room for doing this. And I think if you don't, it will not happen. And number two, as a way to perpetuate this and build it into our culture of operation, we are now expecting that it will be addressed in every forward-looking work plan from each of the units.
Regent Broad.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is a great presentation, and it just kind of strikes me that we're talking about it in an internal fashion and the need to change the internal culture of the university. But I think that there's an external piece that is extremely important as well. As I look at risk-reward as a public body, I think we need to make a good case once we have it developed internally, make a good case to the public why it's so important to take those additional risks to capitalize on additional opportunity. And so I see that external piece of communicating the need to move in this direction and what we're doing internally to move us there, and how and why it's so important for the excellence of the university that we go in that direction. So I think that the internal conversation is fantastic, and I'm pleased that it's going the direction it's going, and I thank you for all your work. I just think that we need to do what we haven't done very well over time, which is communicate why it's important to take the leaps that we might be taking.
Thank you.
Regent Allen.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. I mentioned in committee yesterday a book, and I can't remember the title of it, but I think from the 1980s, that highlighted one of our local companies, 3M. And it talked about how they evaluated people, particularly those they were hoping to move up in management. They looked for some failures. Some people who had had particular failures in their work. The batting average had to be good. You had to have more successes than failures, but if you didn't see some failures, you weren't trying hard enough and you weren't taking the risky things. We need to make it clear that we accept some failure. Yes, we want a high batting average, but we accept some failures along the way, and I think that needs to be clear to people. That's a risky task for a public university. We need to have our friends in the press view it the same way, and report it that way, the same way that, sports reporters look at batting average, not 1,000%. So it's part of the culture, and we are going to get into that if indeed we encourage more risk-taking.
Chair Cohen and Regent Allen. I would just comment that, and also to Regent Beeson's point, when we met with staff and talked to staff, and we have outstanding staff at this university, incredibly creative, productive people, one of their frustrations was that they felt they couldn't be as creative or as productive as they wanted to be because there was always a lingering fear that if I make a mistake, it will come back to haunt me personally. And what we basically have tried to tell people through this exercise is what we hope to be able to deliver for them within their responsibilities, a range of acceptable action. And to your point, if once in a while you fail, but are operating within those guidelines, we'll add it to the batting average. And I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of opportunity for creative thinking that we're going to open the door for with this type of approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for a really interesting, informative report. Vice President Mulcahy, Associate Vice President Webb, and Director Waldemar. Sounds like some very interesting ideas are going on. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're moving to the exciting part of the agenda where we're going to go over three policies, three Regent policies. The first one is the Board of Regents policy on board operations and agenda guidelines. And these changes were reviewed at the December board meeting, and I would entertain a motion to adopt the changes.
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion about the policy? Regent Frobenius.
I want to raise a point, not to change this current change to the policy, but to suggest that there may be some more coming. I'm trying to find the page that we're on here. 58. 58. Thank you. Give me just a minute.
It might be 64 that you're looking
at. All right. This covers This covers the responsibilities of our committees and identifies specific tasks. I've looked at most of this from the standpoint of the Finance Committee and Operations Committee, which I currently chair, and there are various things that we review and very little things that we act on. And as you noted today, as we were talking about the 6-year capital plan, the committee did a deeper dive on that yesterday, but you have no basis for knowing what the committee's conclusion was based upon that deeper dive into the information. And I've had discussion with several of you as I've started to think about this more, that committees would do a better job, in my opinion, if they were making some formal recommendation to the board based upon their review. I think it would hold the committee more accountable and responsible, and I think it could be helpful. I'm going to be pushing those suggested changes with the chair and others over the next few weeks and months with the goal of bringing some changes back to this policy. And I thought this, rather than hold this thing up today because we're acting on some things that we've changed some time ago, I want to put sort of the board on notice that I think those would be very helpful changes to the operation of our board.
Thank you, Regent Frobenius, and I would encourage the chairs and the members of other committees to also scrutinize their committee, the things that they recommend and the things that they just discuss, and to see if there's some changes they would want to make too. I think it's, as you suggested, it's probably important to approve this policy right now, and then we can make changes as we go along. Regent Simmons.
Comment on Regent Frobenius's point. It strikes me that when the committee chairs present to this board, we should make sure we allow ample time, and as we prepare our remarks with the support of the board staff, take out those key messages, positions, if you will, that were created in the committees, and make sure we're sharing them with the full board. I think we do that in a spotty way.
Yes. Any other discussion? Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we have a policy, new policy, the amended policy, and there may be some amendments coming in the future. The next one is the Board of Regents policy, reservation and delegation of authority. And again, these changes were reviewed in our December meeting, and so I would entertain a motion to adopt the changes.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion about the policy. Regent Broad.
And I don't think it's any surprise to people here that I have some concerns over this policy. I had no concern with the policy that we previously adopted related to purchases and increasing the threshold on purchases, because to me the purchases are part of the operations of the university, whereas the real estate transactions are kind of preceding other policy actions and other actions that we'll need to make into the future. And so I think it provides us some opportunity for context as to what's going on in the university, and some opportunity to get to know some of the transactions and some of the future things that will be coming toward us as a member of the board. I tend to think that in this world right now, the more transparency the better, and the more accountability the better, as we try to strike a balance between the operations and ease of board and administration, while at the same time ensuring that we're doing what we need to do in terms of accountability. I have some concern that increasing the thresholds to this level will pull out from under us the opportunity, unless we're presented that opportunity by the administration, the opportunity to see what's going on in the coordinate campuses. There's some things that come to us in these real estate transactions that we wouldn't see otherwise. And I think that's good for us as a board. Now, if we were a private entity, a private corporation, I'd say absolutely, get that threshold up. I would have no concerns over doing that if we were a private entity, but we're not. We're a public body, and I want to see us move in a direction of greater transparency and accountability. So I'm not in support of this. I understand the need to streamline. I absolutely understand that need. I think that this is a place that I'd prefer us holding the threshold stable.
All right. Thank you, Regent Broad. And just so all of the regents, I believe we're on page 74 of our docket material. Okay, Regent Allen.
I'll vote for the approval of this, but I do want to say I have some of the same reservations that Regent Broad has expressed. I don't really have a problem with raising the threshold for our action, but I do have some worry of the fact that that automatically kind of means losing the visibility of some of the other things that the staff are doing, which I think gives you some insight. And I think that whole subject will need some more discussion, but I'll support the current change and hope we have some more discussion on it.
Okay. Regent Simmons.
I'm going to support the point as well. Thank you, because I think that while the dollar amounts are of less interest to me here, real estate is a more sensitive matter that I think the board does need to make sure we continue to be responsible and accountable for. So one of the things we've talked about as we do change some of these thresholds, and they're thresholds, is to make sure we have good reporting come to us. And even though something can be approved at another level, we still see what the transactions have been. So that we need to watch for.
Okay. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm going to take a contrary view. Frankly, I think these thresholds are too low. If you look at the size of our operation, these are very, very small numbers. And we're asking staff to slow down their activity. It's an efficiency issue. And so I support the resolution. Frankly, I would like to see these increased in the future.
President Kaler.
Chair Cohen and several members, I will comment. I do see these as really splitting into two things. There are some housekeeping transactions we have to do, easements, various other things that are easy. And then there are real estate transactions that in fact do represent strategic steps. And I think what I have to ask the board to do is to rely on me and my management team to understand the difference between those. And when we're taking a strategic step, to bring that to the appropriate committee, even if its dollar value may be below these new thresholds. And of course, we will do that.
Regent Frobenius.
This discussion has been interesting to me, and I'm also a fan usually of raising limits all the time, but the reporting part of this raises some interesting issues, because the other variable, particularly in lease arrangements, is the length of time of the lease. You can have $1 million lease that is $100,000 a year or $1 million a year, depending upon the term of the lease. And I think there's some reporting elements in here that are important. And if we go ahead and just go along with this and say we'll pick up the reporting at a later date, I think that kind of sometimes slips through the cracks. Not that management won't have the intention of doing that, but I think I will support holding off on this one until we make those reporting changes on the real estate transactions.
Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I tend to be of the same mindset as Regent Beeson on this issue. President Kaler's comment a few minutes ago gives me 100% confidence that we're moving in the right direction here. I do get a little concerned when I hear it phrased as, you know, we may be giving up transparency. I don't think we're giving up transparency. We're moving efficiency forward here, and with the commentary of President Kaler, I'm comfortable doing that.
I'd like to make a comment.
Regent Larson, please do.
I also support Regent Beeson's comments.
All right. We have healthy differences of opinion, which I think is important for the board to express. And if there's no further discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. And abstentions. So 2 opposed. All right, the motion carries, and we'll go with this policy. And now the third policy that we're going to look at is an amendment to the Policy Code of Ethics for members of the Board of Regents. And Regent Allen was head of a work group who looked at that policy, so I'm going to ask him to make some remarks.
Thank you very much, Regent Cohen. This came about left over from when I was chair, and we did have a work group that looked at it and made a recommendation. That was reported to the board at the June meeting. There were basically 3 changes, a couple of them pretty routine. Number one, it changed the reporting date for some of our personal disclosure to make it more aligned with the other reporting. Secondly, it clarified student employment definitions by referring to the student employment definitions that exist in many of our policies and procedures elsewhere, and so that was consistent. The third change was the one that we had very long discussion on, namely the situation of an employee wanting to be a regent. I think we've had adequate discussion on it. There may not be full agreement on it, but I think there's substantial agreement on it. This item was on the December agenda. I could not attend, and as a point of personal privilege, I asked that it be delayed, and I appreciate the board doing that for me. Although it's listed for review today, I kind of sense it's probably ready for action. And hoping that I might not be offending anyone, I will make a motion to approve the policy as prepared.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to vote on this policy today. I'll open it up for discussion. Oh, hearing there's no discussion, then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you for the work group and your work, Regent Allen, on this particular policy. We will now move to the reports of the various committees. Regent Ramirez, the Educational Planning and Policy Committee.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. We had an action item, the Board of Regents policy tuition and fees. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the proposed change to the Board of Regents policy on tuition and fees. This change allows implementation of a college-specific tuition surcharge. I move adoption of the revised policy.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Is there some discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? The motion carries.
We had a consent report for review in action. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes various academic program changes. I move its approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Under non-action items, the committee discussed and received information on proposed changes to the Board of Regents policy on submitting and accepting sponsored projects, and lengthy overview and real grounding in the undergraduate curriculum of the Twin Cities campus. We are also very pleased to welcome Provost Karen Hansen to our committee. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regent Ramirez. The next report will be from the Facilities Committee, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. On behalf of the Facilities Committee, action items. First, capital budget amendment to the 4th Street Southeast Residence Hall and Dining Facility on the Twin Cities campus. The committee voted 4-1 to recommend approval of the capital budget amendment to provide funding for the 4th Street Southeast Residence Hall and Dining Facility. I move its approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One no. And the motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Second of all, the capital budget amendment, Crookston Residence Hall and Academic Classroom Building. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the capital budget amendment for the Crookston Residence Hall and Academic Classroom Building on the Crookston campus. I move its approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thirdly, the capital budget amendment to Lind Hall, the first floor remodel project and structural repairs. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of this project for Lind Hall, a first floor remodeling project and structural repairs. I move its approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair, members of the board, fourth capital budget amendment for Lind Hall first floor remodel project of the Taylor Center upgrade. The committee did vote unanimously to recommend approval of the capital budget amendment for this project on the Taylor Center upgrade. I move its approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Under the consent report, the committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes agreements for use of university facilities and services for the National Sports Foundation for the USA Cup Soccer July 12th through 22 of the year 2012 on the Twin Cities campus. Move its approval.
All right. And there's a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
And Madam Chair, board members, 3 non-action items. The committee also discussed and received information on, first, issues related to the 2012 6-year capital improvement plan. Secondly, a report of the Twin Cities campus master plan, open space plan progress. And finally, a report on utilities and energy management. Madam Chair, this concludes our report.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. The next report will be from the report on the Faculty, Staff, and Student Affairs Committee, Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I have 3 action items to present for board consideration. First, the committee unanimously recommends approval of the collective bargaining agreement between the University of Minnesota and Graphic Communications Conferences of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Local 1M. I move approval and note that Regent Swigum did not vote.
Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
The committee unanimously recommends approval of the collective bargaining agreement between the University of Minnesota and International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 292. Again, Regent Swigum did not vote. I move approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes appointment of R. Scott Studham as Vice President and Chief Information Officer and conferral of tenure for 2 faculty members who were recently hired at the University of Minnesota. Regent Swigum did not vote. I move its approval.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. We also had discussion of 3 items. The first was proposed changes to Board of Regents policies on sexual harassment and nepotism and personal relationships. This will come back for committee action and recommendation to the board. We also heard a very interesting and impressive presentation on the university's wellness program for employees, and we all felt better after that. And third, we heard a marvelous presentation from the University of Minnesota Duluth with respect to their work to create a positive and inclusive campus climate by advancing equity, diversity, and social justice.
Thank you for your report, Regent Simmons. Now, report of the Finance and Operations Committee, Regent Frobenius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under action items, the committee recommends approval of the consent report, which included the purchase of goods and services over $1 million. Regent Sviggum did not vote. I move its approval.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Under our non-action items, the committee also discussed and received information on issues related to the financial impact of the 2012 6-year capital plan, and I commented on the impact of that during that discussion. Secondly, the committee received a report on annual insurance and risk management and concluded, I think the consensus of the committee was that that was a satisfactory report and very positive and continued to do well. The committee received the Carlson School of Management tuition surcharge differential presentation. Committee reviewed issues related to the annual capital finance and debt management report, some of which you saw also in the 6-year capital plan. We also had summary reports regarding central reserves and our progress on restoring back to our targeted balance within the central reserves, and an update on the Investment Advisory Committee, who is going through a very thoughtful process to develop a set of recommendations for our committee and ultimately this board on changes in the asset allocation guidance for the University of Minnesota's Consolidated Endowment Fund. Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Frobenius. And Regent Frobenius, I'm going to ask you to give the report of the Audit Committee. Since Regent Beeson was unable to be at that committee, Regent Frobenius served as chair for that day.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and it was a pleasure to have the opportunity to attempt to fill Regent Beeson's shoes in that chair position, but I didn't meet his high standards, I'm sure. And the board unanimously supported you. Okay. All right. Anyway, the committee discussed and received information on various topics. One was the internal audit update, and I want to comment on that update. One of the things that the audit committee does is follow the progress of management, the departments of the university in resolving major recommendations that come out of the internal audit report. And we have a target of about getting 40% of those resolved in any given month, and this time period, in this particular time period, 67% of outstanding recommendations were cleared, and that was a good report and significant progress for the university. The second item we received was the external auditor's review of the completed audit work and letters to management. And I would report again that there was no management letter to the audit committee, was to management, as is normal, but it's unusual, and some signs of some really good work done by both our auditors and our management group that none of those issues required items that would go to the level of the audit committee in the process. So that's an encouraging bit of news about that process. Thirdly, we received a presentation on the audit landscape in higher education, some of the evolution that's occurring around the country. We've got a few suggestions of things we could be pursuing, as well as some assurances that we are dealing with some of the cutting-edge changes that, cutting-edge positive risk management and audit changes occurring across the country. That was presented by two national people in the Deloitte firm. Madam Chair, that concludes my report from the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Regent Frobenius. Regent Allen.
Chair, could I just add something to that?
Certainly.
After our meeting with the auditors in the Audit Committee, I asked them a question. I said, you know, as you go about your other work with other clients, it's very often that you suggest going to look at someone else to see how it's done there to solve a problem. I said, do you often recommend the University of Minnesota? They said, yes, we do all the time. The audit function there is exceptional, and we often recommend to other clients that they go look at how it's done there.
Thank you for that comment, Regent Allen. Regent Hung, a report of the Litigation Review Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to notice sent by the University, the Litigation Review Committee met on January 17, 2012. A resolution was considered and passed that authorized the closing of the meeting. In the closed meeting, a discussion was held of matters that are subject to the attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Hung. I believe we have no old business today, but I have one issue for new business, and that is a conflict of interest issue. As all of you regents are aware, on January 16, 2012, Regent Steve Sviggum announced that he had accepted employment as Communications Director and Executive Assistant for the Minnesota Senate Majority Caucus. The General Counsel and I began discussing the possibility of an employment-related conflict of interest under board policy. The Code of Ethics policy is clear in stating that regents are expected to put aside parochial interests, keeping the welfare of the entire university, not just a particular constituency, at all times paramount. It also declares as an employment-related conflict exists whenever a regent's employment relationships may impair independence of judgment. Following this announcement, I have spoken with Regent Sviggum about this matter and met with him on 2 occasions. At my request, he has agreed and did abstain from voting at this month's committee and board meetings, so we could have time to consider this matter. Based upon my understanding of his employment responsibilities, this position appears to me to constitute an employment-related conflict of interest with his duties as a regent. Therefore, pursuant to our Section 6, Subdivision 3 of the Code of Ethics, I have asked our General Counsel to provide an opinion as to whether an employment-related conflict of interest exists, and if so, the degree or pervasiveness of that conflict. I have also directed the Office of the General Counsel to engage an independent attorney at my discretion and with my approval to consult and render an opinion on this matter. That attorney is John Stout of the Frederickson and Byron Law Firm in Minneapolis. Mr. Stout currently chairs the Corporate Governance Committee of the American Bar Association's Business Law Section, has extensive experience in corporate and nonprofit governance, and is widely recognized as an expert in this field. Both opinions are to be provided to me by February 24, 2012. After I have considered the opinions of the attorneys, I will make a determination regarding the conflict and bring forward a recommendation to the board, or I will appoint an ad hoc group to assist me with these tasks. This is a complex and serious matter that warrants our careful review and due diligence. My rationale for taking this approach is to ensure that we have the benefit of our General Counsel's judgment and experience, as well as an independent outside counsel's review of the situation. This process is consistent with the board's governing documents deliberative nature, duty to act in the best interest of the university, and history of acting with the highest degree of integrity to advance the university's mission and serve Minnesota's citizens. Together, we will use our best informed judgment to arrive at a decision. It is my intent to have the full board discuss and act upon any recommendation before or at the beginning of our regular March meeting. The questions raised in this matter are well beyond the current and particular future interests of a regent. It is important that we be objective, judicious, and fair, and I believe this process lives up to those principles. Are there any comments or questions? Regent Simmons.
Yes, Chair Cohen, I would like to thank you for your leadership in committing this board to address such a serious issue. People who care about the university have recently been expressing their concern that if this goes one way, that is the way that Regent Swigum wants it to go, that the university will, if we don't adhere to that, the university would be punished. And I just want to say I don't share that worry or fear. I have great faith in our legislature that they care deeply about the people of Minnesota, about this university, that they are honorable and would not punish the university over one person's interests. I'd also like to express my hope that the people of this university community and the state more broadly will trust this board and have the patience as we undertake a deliberative and high-integrity process that will best allow us to fulfill our responsibility of maintaining the highest ethical standard and highest functionality of a governing board. Thank you.
Comment?
Yes, Regent Larson.
I would just like to concur 100% with what Regent Simmons just said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Larson. Regent Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair Simmons. I agree with the previous comments that were made, and also just want to note that in our conversations about risk that we have had during these meetings and in the past, that we've considered processes and tried to eliminate some burdens on processes at the university that are associated with risk, but we have not had any discussion about our willingness to increase our appetite for risk when it comes to our code of conduct or our high ethical standards. And so I just want to be very clear that the code of conduct that we have and our code of ethics that we just approved is not overly burdensome on this board, I don't believe. And in fact, it's a requirement for our participation here and really our duty to the state of Minnesota to adhere to. So just wanted to draw a distinction between the conversations about risk we've been having and our code of ethics. Thank you.
Regent Swigum.
Madam Chair, I think it would be appropriate if I could ask of you to make a statement.
You would
if
like to
possible.
make a statement? Yes.
Madam Chair, I thank you. I thank you much. And as you know, you and I have had a number of conversations to which I very, very much appreciate the depth of the conversation, the feeling, and the consideration. I have tried not to call any of you and reach out to you or lobby you on this situation for obvious reasons. I did consider emailing you with the backgrounds and what took place and my thought as well as others. Chair Cohen recommended to me not to send the email, I think because of data privacy issues, and so I did not send that email. So it's not like I've not been trying to communicate with you. And let me also apologize. I don't want my picture in the paper. I don't want my name in the paper. There was a time that that was true. 10 years ago, that was true. That's not true today. And to you, I will apologize for today in the Tribune getting your pictures in the paper. That's unfortunate. And it's an unfortunate placement right next to the obituary column, too. But that's where it was. Having said that, I want you to know that I did not enter into this decision of employment lightly at all. As members here on the board and members in the audience know, I did not enter into it lightly. I entered into it with a great deal of consideration and advisement. Life, members, is not always black and white. It's not always black and white. There is a continuum of choices in life that we live within. And that continuum is usually one in which you enter into management. In 34 and a half years of public service, my ethics has never, ever, ever been questioned, nor will it be. And I mean that very sincerely, and I look you all right in the eye and tell you that. It is not a question, it is above reproach. And any of you know me or know my public service know that. I'll set that record clear right away, because whenever you get your picture in the paper or your name there and it says conflict of interest, somebody says you're guilty before you're proven innocent. And I understand that in the public sphere. I recognize that to be take place. Any situation usually can be managed. I have offered a management plan to my current employer, the Minnesota Senate. I've offered to Chair Cohen suggestions of a management plan if a perception, real or perceived, conflict of interest exists. They even include, I offered, I think, 3 different things, Chair Cohen, to you to consider, including placing my life in her or in your hands at some appropriate time in the future, when buying some time, I think, Reverend Johnson, is how you would term it, for things to surface, to develop, to see what does take place as far as consequences. You were very good about talking about time. If I get a bit emotional about this, I apologize. But I feel pretty strongly and I feel pretty passionately. Without getting into the specific details, know that I vetted the concern about employment, conflict of interest, knowing what took place in the past. Unfortunately, myself would be in the past a year ago with persons of the majority who reached out to hire me. By the way, I did not reach out to them. With members of the Board of Regents regarding policy of this board, talking about the policy of this board, and very directly, I did take notes. I do have the notes with counsel of this board, and I do have the notes, and I did take them very directly in regards to the questions that I had previously written down. It was not until after talking and speaking with the policy of this board, with members of the board, the chair, the vice chair who was on the phone, and council, did I officially apply for the job. Not until after that. And I do have written back down the responses to the question that I asked directly about board policy. Having said that, there are some do-nots in my life right now. First, I sincerely do not want to bring to you, as my fellow board members, any confrontation. Regent Hung, Regent Allen, I don't want to bring you any confrontation. That is not my goal. I don't want to do that. 2, I do not want to bring any negative reactions, any harm to this wonderful institution of the university. Do not want to do that. And 3, I do not have an unmanageable, whether it be perceived or whether it be real, conflict of interest. Those are 3 do nots. And I believe they are mutually inclusive, not exclusive of each other. I will close quickly. But I think and I feel very, very strongly that life is not always my way or the highway. Life is not always you do it my way or you don't do it at all. Take my ball and go home. You manage things in life. You manage choices. It is a continuum. And all of us have bemoaned those decision makers, whether they be local, whether they be state, whether they be federal, that feel it's all my way or it's the highway and that things are not cooperatively handled, reached out in balance. You know, I wish the papers tomorrow, they're sitting right there, I wish that they would write their article and the headlines would be 6-year capital plan, thoughts, decisions, you know, for student resources. And they would spend 95% of the article writing about that and then writing about the deliberation and the systems that go into our risk management. I wish they'd write about that and then 1 sentence about this. We all know that's not true. It's going to be just the reverse. We know that. That's what sells papers. That's what their interest is. And that's why there was a camera here. It's very, very unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. I reach out to you and ask for the balance, the consideration of that continuum of choices, which I think is deserved. Thank you.
I just want to reiterate again that together we will use our best informed judgment to arrive at a decision, and that it is very important to me personally, to this board with its great integrity, to the university and to the citizens of Minnesota, that we be objective, judicious, and fair, and we will very much be that. Thank you. If there's no further if there's no further business, I believe I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? The meeting's adjourned.